So honesty, it's a difficult one because one can be honest in one's intent and yet tell an untruth, right? And so there's multi levels to honesty. I guess something like, do your words and actions align with, or do your actions align with your words, and do your words align with your beliefs? Something like that is where honesty lies. And so one can be honest and be wrong, right? One can be honest and be factually inaccurate, and that doesn't mean that one's been dishonest. One has been misled, perhaps, or something like that.
So one can be honest to one's beliefs, but one also must strive to be honest to the truth that it's also unreachable. A concept we made up of a collective reality. So that connects to reality itself. So honesty, being honest to one's beliefs, is also the opposite. Being able to examine one's belief, to explain what I'm honest to what one is honest to. So it becomes a recursive circle of being honest to one's belief and also examining one's belief as to explain what one is honest towards.
Yes, I mean, that draws a very clear link, doesn't it, between honesty and openness? Because without openness, one can never really claim honesty, because unless one actually believes one knows the truth of everything, right? Then one cannot be honest without also being open to the possibility of being wrong and wishing to deepen one's level of understanding, right? So an appreciation that one knows little, if anything, is right at the core of honesty, right? Humility and openness and curiosity. It's weird, isn't it? But all of these feel like you can't be honest without also having these traits, because honesty is as you say, it's a recursive circle. It's not a binary state. It's a recursive circle of moving towards this thing of truth which doesn't actually exist.
Yeah. So moving this recursive circle of moving towards truth, using humility, curiosity, openness, constantly displaying one's beliefs and also what's the English word? Retrying one's beliefs, constantly reevaluating one's beliefs in that openness and that being curious about oneself's honesty. Am I being honest? Am a person being honest towards the beliefs? That examination, recursive circle, requires a large amount of openness to the world and oneself, as to tell the story of what one being honest towards.
Yeah, so one can be honest about one can be honest without knowing the truth, right? One can be honest in one's intent. There's a purity to honesty. There's an innocence. There's a childlike innocence to real honesty. There was the Star Trek: The Next Generation. The character Data in that was an android, and he was completely honest, right? There was no subterfuge or multi-leveled. There was none of that. It was just completely. And there was a childlike quality to that honesty, right? That kind of naked. There's a vulnerability also. It's just God. It's a huge thing, honesty. And I must admit, it didn't initially occur that it was that it had links to so many other important character traits.
Yes. So that the Data being that honest person examining his honesty at the same time being open about it also brings us back to his AI honest today, when what AI is mostly just black boxes as far as from honesty and openness and truth we can come, because we can't really understand it. So that's a narrative arc of itself when you talk about fictional androids like Data and true AI, that is very hard to know if they're honest, and honest towards what. So this becomes a very process of displaying honesty towards what, and in that recursive circle, constantly reevaluating the purity of one's honesty and the intent.
This is a very interesting question, honesty and AI. This is a very, very interesting question, because computers, I'm not talking about self-learning AI, but computers cannot be anything other than completely honest and faithful, right? They just do what they do. There's no opportunity for judgment calls and opinions and biases and religious ideas and moral codes, and all of that stuff just simply doesn't exist in that domain. And so in that sense, they are completely honest. It's it's a very interesting one. It seems to me that AI can be nothing but honest, because it operates directly from measurable physical. It's in the hands of those who utilize the AI where the dishonesty comes along, right? This AI is here to maximize your choices and ability to act in the world, but actually what it's here for is to suck your attention so that we can sell it to people.
Yeah. So the honesty becomes of the intent behind the AI and the computer program. Like the paperclip Maximize is completely honest about trying to maximize paperclips and nothing else. But honesty, that's a one-dimensional point towards something, and that's where humanity comes in, because honesty is not a one-dimensional single truth. It's a multitude layer of hundreds and thousands of truths all mashing together that one has to be honest towards. So the examination process and the openness process become exceedingly more important when we talk about honesty, to constantly talk about intent and truth in the process of being honest.
Yeah, that feels absolutely right, that the openness and examination is key to honesty, because honesty, as we said right at the start, honesty has got very little to do with factual accuracy, right? It's not really about that. It is much more about intent and desire for improvement, something like that, right? For deepening understanding, there's an earnestness in striving that's something to do with honesty. So going back to the AI thing, I guess dishonesty in AI would be something like a bug or a glitch, right? In the same way that when DNA replicates, when an error is made, that's an unfaithful reproduction, right? That's dishonesty at the mechanical level, if you like. That's a form of dishonesty at the mechanical level.
Yeah, there's the internal honesty of an AI, the programming. This is what it's honest towards, but there can also be bugs like human biases in an AI that skews it from its intended truth or intended target for being honest towards. But also there is also the complexity that as AI becomes complex, like the human brain, it's very hard to see the whole picture towards the intent and the truth towards the honesty in itself. But internally, the AI is, of course, 100% honest towards its own programming, much like us, but we have so many multi-layered different program running parallel that we can't really decide and know towards what we're honest towards. So this becomes to highlight the importance of always re-examining what we are honest towards.
Yeah, I mean, this is where honesty really comes into play, isn't it? Is when truths collide with each other, when truths contradict each other, that somehow you've got to navigate that. And I think what you navigate that with is your honesty, your integrity, yeah, that was very cool, Michael. That was really good. That was really good. I had no idea. There was no idea there was so much to honesty.
Yeah. objectivity, free from human biases. So an impossible concept, whatever we may think of it, just like perfection or wisdom. So objectivity is something we strive for, but can never really reach. But the closer we strive for objectivity, the closer we will get to objectivity. So while impossible, we still can merit and cherish the walk towards objectivity. And in that we must be humble that we never reach it, but at the same time be open with that we...
The walk towards objectivity, it's not about becoming objective. It's about aiming to be objective. How do we aim to be objective? Openness, acknowledgement of our own infallibility, our own fallibility, accepting that we only have one angle to look at the truth. We're one eye. We can only feel one part of the elephant.
We can only feel one part of the elephant of objectivity. The striving of feeling the different parts of objectivity, the fairness, the different perspective, taking into account complete life stories when trying to be fair and objective. Maybe one of the most demanding tasks of becoming objective. So the striving and the path and the the knowingness of never reaching there, but always the striving is all that the human can do during a lifetime. So it's a mastery of sorts.
Different ways of being objective. It's a mastery of sorts. It will take a lifetime. Master of what? Which tools do we become masters of using? Master of taking a step back, perhaps. A master of engaging our humility. A master of disengaging our bravado, our assumption, our presumption. It's disengagement and engagement.
Disengagement and engagement. The term objectivity, just striving to see objects as they are. What does that even mean? To be objective, to take in all perspectives, all views in account on an object, on a thought, on a concept, on a story, on a narrative, on a vision, on an acting, on a doing objectivity, thinking objectivity. Can objectivity ever be separated from all the objects we are about?
Can objectivity be separate from all of the things that we look at? Can we be truly objective about everything? I mean, asking that question, we're trying to be objective about objectivity itself. We're trying to see all the possible ways, looking at many angles of objectivity.
All the angles, and also being aware of all the human biases and stepping past them requires a mastery in all the human biases itself. Something that is not even on the agenda of mastering the simplest one of the biases. So this is a long path and a long learning and conversation about human biases in itself, to see past them or be with them when you make decision, and that every angle and decision on a course that tries to be objective must explain the human biases we're still not seeing past as well, and acknowledge them in an open.
We have the object. We can look at it from different angles, but we also need to be aware of the lens through which we look. We might look at it from many different angles, but still only see blue or red or green, because we have the same lens that filters out certain light, certain colors. What are the angles? What are the filters?
What are the filters and the lenses we apply when seeing anything deep inside our human consciousness, connected to the overlaying normalization of human biases that is probably same-ish in all of us, but not the same as well. So it becomes a very complex process of taking into account one's own personal lenses compared to the overlaying effect of the collection of human biases. This forms a looking matrix where the lenses are at front, representing both biases and viewpoints.
Oh, Albert, just 1 minute. Okay, sorry, my son's just turned up. Just 1 minute. Okay, sweetheart, I'm just playing again. Biology, psychology, sociology, these are possible filter types. Our biology alters how we see, our psychology alters how we see, and our society alters how we see. I wonder if there are more More points on the matrix.
Accountability. To enforce accountability, there should be a clear connection among the action of the person that we want to be accountable and the consequences of his actions in such a way that we can connect the second to the first. And not just the action, but also the consequences of the action. Just in this way, we can trace back and point to the person that we want to be accountable and ask for accountability about his action and the consequences of his action. So all this process should be transparent. We should have way to trace it.
Accountability and even before tracing it and working with it, it seems there needs to be some kind of agreement of who's with, like, why would anybody first engage in that relation and be there, like, accountable? So it seems like there's a commitment of sorts. So if a person is born, they're not necessarily already accountable to somebody for something, and one can be accountable for one thing but not the other. So it's somehow related to committing to something and then carrying that responsibility, and being accountable is a realization of that responsibility, a part of it.
Responsibility for something predetermined, pre-mapped, and accepted. The acceptance might not be there, but the accountability will be more accurate, more effective, more functional if it is accepted. The other thing is the methods by which the tracing can happen perhaps need to be considered in advance for it to be effective. How might we be accountable? What are the ways of being accountable?
Is accountability usually used to point out mischief errors, or is accountability usually used to point out good deeds and good result, or both? Tracing good result against tracing mischief or not so good action. The tracing needs to be different, because in the case of good action, the accountable person will do everything possible to make them visible, while for mischief and bad action could be he will do everything to hide them from the tracing. But could be also that good action are not so good and they are just promoted as good.
So accountability, in terms of the strategies, how it is implemented, can be very different as a process, depending on whether the person has trust, has integrity to deliver the responsibilities, and it may be even that in certain cultures there's a high regard for integrity. It's a high demand, and so the relation to accountability is different. There are different expectations, and people are enforcing or realizing it differently, just based on their culture, just based on the amount of integrity.
Different cultures require different levels of integrity. Accountability is also about being seen to be. Being integrated, having integrity isn't enough. Accountability requires that you are seen to have integrity. Different cultures have different requirements. Some cultures prefer privacy. Some cultures acknowledge impact on choices.
In some culture, if the person that needs to be accountable will do an action that underperform or that is a mischief, he will openly and immediately leave his role publicly. In other culture, this doesn't happen. He will defend his deeds. He will try to derail what is accused of, to keep the position, so to show himself still accountable, but without taking the consequences of his action. And this is very, very cultural. In Italy, the second one rules.
Yes. So to understand accountability, we may need to look at various cultures. We may need to understand how those cultures operate, how they maintain those processes, how do they sort of put in accountability and integrity, how they bring them back to accountability. Since it's a very practical thing, it needs to be implemented, so it will be implemented in various ways. It will evolve over time.
Evolving methods of accountability, evolving approaches. Maybe cultures learn. Maybe not. Why not? Why do some cultures demand an individual take responsibility and be accountable, whilst others feel okay with allowing people not to take that responsibility? What's the difference?
Can be that the difference is in the beginning, in what all the system, in which is the apparent reason for which some person are in charge. If they are in charge, either to act as integral people, honest people, and so on, doesn't matter the reason why they make an error, they mischief, or they behave in a way that is unaligned. That is enough to get out of the system. In other places, if the reason you made a bad deeds or behaved badly is in the interest of a larger group of people, it will be accepted and you will not be accountable for that. Quite the opposite.
Yeah, the last thing that you said kind of brought me to this thought of where is the beginning even? Is it at the setup of the governmental structures, or is it at the family level? Like how the culture works with integrity and accountability. How do we, in fact, how are we taught all those things, and what are we taught to expect from the higher ups? Like, is there a stratification of the society of like, you know, all these are like always been this way?
And are we allowed to be accountable? So, you know, if admitting an error means you're cast out, you're rendered helpless, you're punished, you're beaten, then it's a lot harder to, you know, and it's much harder to open yourself up for being accountable. And this is one of those things, isn't it, where in the act of demanding that somebody be accountable, you may in fact drive them to not be. And sometimes we get that training, we get that training as kids, right? You know, it's but that, yeah, and that question of what is it, the system first, or is it the people, or is it the family unit, or is it something biological? Like what is it that's causing that's a big question.
Joke is arising in me hearing that, like, if the family doesn't get you, the society will. if you're saved by the family and like brought up in a nice way, the society will keep hammering on you, or you'll want to leave, or I don't know, or you'll become a revolutionary or something like that.
Yeah, but as an Italian, what we often see is that politicians like will use leverage for their voters. Like, yes, I did that is out of the rules, but I did it for you.
Okay, yes.
So to be selfless is really important. It's something we really want from anyone in a leadership position. We don't want them to be there for themselves. We want them to serve in whatever capacity they're in. We want them to be serving that role and the people who depend upon them. We don't want their personal needs to get in the way of them serving. And of course they do have personal needs, so we can't ignore the fact that anyone in leadership will have their own personal needs, but it's the ability to put that, yes, it's the ability to put that to one side for the benefit of the role. I think that's the important thing.
So we could ask this politician person in the moment he get in charge to take a piece of paper and split in 2 columns. And in one columns, he will list his personal need. And then, or personal interest, personal needs, personal interest. And then if he will be able to detach from as much of them as possible, he will get a closer percentage to 100% of selflessness.
Mm.
But is that human? Is that really possible?
Yes, we're asking something quite difficult, aren't we? And yet ask it we must. Right, certain countries do have a recognition that there'll be a measure of corruption in their politicians, and they try and design things to try and stop that from happening. But we do need standards without trying to. It's like when you try to do something, you could aim high, even if you're going to fail, at least even if we know people are going to fail, we can hold them accountable. We say, you agreed to not take care of your own needs. And that's the standard we hold you to, Mr. Politician or Mrs. Politician. And then, so we've actually got some kind of structure that we can, some kind of...
Needs or interest, that is the point for me, for us. How can we ask someone to not take care of their needs? Then we should understand what is the difference among a needs, between a needs and an interest. I think we this interest or needs. Being selflessness is not taking care of your needs, basic needs, is the ability to identify your interest and what is an interest and not a needs, and not taking care of those.
We have it with medicine, don't we? When a doctor's done a piece of research and they're putting their research up, they are required to declare their interests. And we do that with politicians as well. And we do it in different fields of life where people say, no, I have to put my hand up here. I have interests which perhaps don't allow the person to do the job. They can say, actually, you know, this doesn't really work for me because I have too many personal interests. So there is a way of they call it recusing yourself, where you recognize that your personal interests might make you a little less able. But also we need to make sure that our public servants are not in a need where they feel pressured to be corrupt. They need to have their personal reasonable needs need to be taken care of. Well, I don't think for the most part we have a problem with paying them enough.
Seems that selflessness can be reached or imposing rules, parameters, double check, commissions, declaration, and so on. So externally imposed on the politician, or can be that selflessness is a characteristic, an innate can be, or an inclination of a people, of a person, of the human beings that take charge of something, and take charge of something already being selflessness. And exactly because he is selflessness is like called to get there. But how can then the system promote the fact that this kind of people got there?
And I'm not sure. It's very difficult for a system to make value judgments about the honor of another person. That's why we vote and we listen to things they say and we look into their history. So in a sense, I think perhaps the system, when it's looking at selflessness, it's things like the checklist. do you belong to this company? Have, you know, the law of non-corruption sits there. But in terms of how a person is judged as being selfless, we could have two people who've worked very hard for a charity in the past, and one of them has been motivated by the desire for glory, and the other's been motivated by a true desire. And it's not easy to tell the difference between those two people. It's hard.
Seems our humanity, our society is missing or is not developing anymore, or there are not education system or example people to let people develop the sensitivity to feel if a person in front of him or her is a selflessness, and could be other characteristics, but we always have to get that perception filtered by systems, external system, checklist, declaration, and so on. So it seems like it's innate in the nowadays system, political system, and whatever, to not have a way to let those people emerge and other people perceive them as selfless in itself.
I mean, we do have a problem where politically people look at the tribe they're voting for. So they look at the party. They may, rather than looking at a person's life, for example, the UK has a leader who has shown poor judgment in his personal relationships and shown to not be selfless in his personal relationships, and yet he's got into a position of leadership. So perhaps the way the media are dealing with things, the way people talk about who goes into leadership, perhaps they're looking at the wrong measures. They're not being guided to look and think about the result of voting for someone who in their personal life is not an honorable person, quite clearly.
And seems that nowadays politicians try to attract vote exactly promoting some interest opposed to others, so that the people that have the same interest that the politician is promoting will vote for him. So it's in the system that the politician will try to favor some interest and make it as their interest instead of others. So it's so embedded right there. You can't ask the person in charge to take out interest, because is full of voters that wants him to provide advantages for their interest. So the selflessness is basically impossible, or if present, have to be masquerade as I have some interest that I will promote.
Openness could mean different things, but in this context, openness appears to be open to ideas, open to experience, open to not being fixed. Someone who is open is ready to listen. Someone who's closed is dogmatic, they're stuck. So an open leader is a leader who will listen to the people he works with, the people he works for or she works for. There's a flexibility in this notion of openness.
Openness is a way of not being afraid of getting hurt or getting disappointed, but opening the door to find out who others are. And the more open you are, the more you invite others to show who they are. And openness is a way of finding that out really quickly. Not protecting yourself is, I think, the best policy that there is to find out who somebody is.
It would be difficult for a public figure to be both fearful and open at the same time. So in a sense, openness is an expression of a certain type of strength, a certain type of courage, willingness to put dogma and the ego just behind, and to be willing to entertain different points of view, to listen to people one disagrees with respect, and to consider one's own possibility that the individual might be wrong. The person who is open allows themselves to always entertain the idea they may not be right, even if they feel strongly they're right.
Openness is being open to persuasion and listening to facts and pleas, and not being afraid of having the ego hurt by being contradicted or being told they are wrong. So openness has everything to do with a lack of self-protection, and that lack of self-protection also means that they're not afraid to be found out, to be deemed not as smart or as all the ego things that people have to build a wall. So openness is opening the door.
And here we have the problem, because our politicians and many other leaders, but politicians especially, have the persona of being strong, of having, I'm going to lead, I'm going to do this. A lot of rhetoric is used, which is the opposite of openness. In fact, we get a leader who says, well, let's see, let's think about this, let's take advice from some specialists. People may see that openness as a weakness because they've got very used to the sort of unthinking leader. They've got used to, it's easy to be attracted to someone who says, I'm going to fix this and I know how to do it, and that's going to be final and everything will be all right. And people may be mistaken in thinking that that's actually the type of leader they want, perhaps based on their own fears, perhaps.
I think openness has to do with what you just referenced to, is the populism of the meme and easy answers. And society has been conditioned now to have instant gratification instead of waiting. And the person who says, let's hold on, let's find out, let's consult the experts, let me check the scientists and let me check what they say, is seen as weak. And it's so much easier to have a little meme and saying, he's going to take care of us. And it doesn't work that way. The world doesn't work that way. It's better to say, I don't know. And the openness to be able to say, I don't know. I have to consult somebody who knows, or a whole group of people who knows better than I do, is a form of.
So not only do we need our leaders to be open, but we need a society which values openness as a principle and recognizes the complexities of the world, that we have to grow up en masse and get over ourselves and our opinions, and we have to be open, and we have to recognize the value of complex issues that require complex answers, and that one man, one woman, and some strong words just isn't going to do it. And we have to work in groups as well. These single leader things are not really helping either, because that's not open. A single person cannot possibly be fully open. They have to consult with others.
Openness is being open to sitting and shutting up and thinking and allowing new ideas or different ideas or completely novel things to seep through and maybe sit on them for a while. And it is not an instantaneous way of dealing with life. And the problem is that people do want instantaneous answers, because most people are not adults and do not realize that there is not a mother or a father who says you have to sit down and shut up. So it's very hard to transition into adulthood and openness, and being able to being told that you're wrong and seeing the logic of it and going like, yeah.
So this it's a big ask. It's a big ask of people. It's a big ask of an individual to show their what might be considered weakness. It's a big ask of people to grow up.
Is it?
It is a bit, but it has to be done. And perhaps perhaps where we need to start the openness is in our schools with our young. And get over this, I'm the teacher, I'm telling you how it is, how it's going to be. I think perhaps that's where we need to have young people realize that it's okay. Being wrong is one step on the way to being right, discovering, and that's how the world really works. We can change society en masse, but we can certainly start with the education of the young in teaching them the power of complexity and open thinking.
The education is incredibly important, but I think it starts at home, and it is a cultural thing as well, that you can ask, prove it to me, what you're saying is true, and what are your things based upon. And most of humanity doesn't go into adulthood at all. They're struggling with food and shelter and basic things. The ones that have the responsibility to grow up are the ones that have all the basic needs fulfilled and have a way bigger responsibility to be informed, open-minded.
So integrity seems like a word that is often used with some expectations. So could be used quite carefully when we're expecting integrity from people. And at the same time, not so clear what it is. Maybe trying to distinguish it from other things that sound related. For example, integration. Integration being the process and integrity being something already had. So is it after the process? Is it maintaining the integration? Is it somehow very different from integration? How do we define integrity?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to define, but the idea of integrity being to do with expectations and to do with because a building has integrity when it's solid, right? When it's being a good building, right? It has integrity, and so there's something about all of the parts working properly together. Something like that has got something to do with integrity. The use of integrity to describe a person, there's a lot of elements to integrity. It's not a simple thing. It seems like there's a lot of elements to it. So honesty is a part of it, courageousness, forthrightness, the willingness to, you know, be called names by the other side or even by your own side in order to stay in what you believe to be truth, kind of thing. There's many elements to it.
Oh, am I? Oh.
Yeah, it's you.
Integrity is being solid, and if one has integrity, means this person is dependable, and you can lean on them, just like that base that you mentioned in buildings. It's got strength, and the person with integrity is trustworthy. And whatever the problem is, they will be strong enough to face it and to carry people with them towards a good end and towards solutions and towards thinking and towards honesty.
So integrity in people means that other people can rely on them. So it is about the relation, how we define the relation with a particular person. We say that that person has integrity, and at the same time we mean that we can rely on them and that we trust them, or we are advising others to rely on them because of this trust. Maybe we are not related to them, but we can still see them in a public space. We can see how they're acting, and we would depend on them if we would be somehow related. But even if we're not, we can recommend to others that, oh, that person has integrity. I trust them. I think you should too. We can strengthen their status.
Going back to what was said in the first turn, the idea of relationship between integration and integrity. It seems as though integration is the process by which one increases one's level of integrity, right? And again, it's about this notion of being able to rely. Someone who has integrity can be relied upon because they have integrated many different aspects of life, and it is apparent in the way that they comport themselves that they have done so, right? There is a quite palpable feeling when you're around someone who has truly got their shit sorted out. There is a palpable feeling of capableness. This is also a part of integrity. I can't remember, somebody said that they have not just the moral compass to know what the right thing is to do, but the capacity to actually undertake and bring people along in order to accomplish that thing.
Integrity, I think it's a lack of it's a lack of cognitive dissonance. There is a straight path towards integrity, like doing the right thing and not being afraid of thinking, not being afraid of changing your mind, and holding, being there for others, and being really solid for yourself as well. Integrity means a lot. Most people think they have it. I think it's a very rare characteristic. It's hard to find, especially in power positions.
So there's this internal part about integrity, the willingness and the capacity. And then there's the external part, the showing with action, demonstrating of the integrity. And that is achieved through integrating various things. And maybe the reason why it is particularly difficult in the position of power is that there are more things to integrate. There are more challenges, there are more temptations challenging our humanness, and maybe also attracting people who are not as integrated and not having that integrity, but able to fake it and wishing to get all to those resources and yeah.
Yes, it's a non-binary thing, and it's not something you have or do not have. It's a continuum, right? It's a process of forever increasing your capacity, forever increasing your solidity. I like that word, solidity, in yourself, so that you can act in an integrated way, right, with integrity. This notion of integrity and power. This is, I think, what Roland has said is very important. Those who are attracted to power are likely those who have not integrated their lust for power in a positive way, right? And so it manifests as ugly. And so the positions of authority, while they are characterized primarily by power, right? The ability to tell other people what to do. Yeah, you're the one that makes the decisions and gets to tell other people what to do. While they are characterized primarily by power, they will attract people who lack integrity.
Integrity. It's standing by what you believe in. And if you believe in certain things, a yes is a yes and a no is a no. Integrity doesn't allow you to change that just out of a whim, or because you want power, or because you want friends. If one believes in a certain principle, it doesn't matter whether your family or your friends or somebody who pays you tells you to change stuff. Integrity means you hold on to your principles, and you have a position, and it really doesn't matter. And only good reasons, really solid reasons, will allow you to change that.
So integrity in this case seems more like a restraint, or a necessary restraint being present leads to integrity. It's a way to restrain yourself, like Odysseus being tied to a mast, even when there are temptations. There's some internal power that allows to maintain the course, to stick to the principles, rather than give in to some other urges that are telling to change the direction. So it's both the capability to choose the right thing,
the openness, we discussed a lot. It was about being open to changing our minds, about being informed by people who know more, not feeling open for new insights, and not be persuaded by memes or easy solutions. Most solutions are really complex, and solutions for certain things need expertise, and you need people from all sides of expertise to tell us and to change our minds. And that's I think, Jen, what we discussed add to that. I
mean, I I thought openness wasn't that important, but actually when we did it, it was like so vital, because it's about the ability to change, to deal with changing circumstances, to listen to others, it was just so very important, to be avoiding dogma. And it's pretty much the opposite of what we get our leaders to do, because they use rhetoric and we're going to be strong and simplistic answers which people flock to. So we also discovered that openness, not only is it required from our leadership, but there needs to be we need to get our society to value openness and the recognition of complexity. And Lorena says it starts in the home, and I agree with her. And it also in our schools, we need to teach our young to value being wrong and changing your mind and being flexible. And we think that's pretty much not happening. So yeah, who did honesty?
Honesty and lots of other important character traits. You know, vulnerability, openness came up a lot.
Like honesty is the process of constantly reevaluating and the recursiveness of your own honesty. So what are your intention, and what truth are you believing in and aiming for? And you have to be open to yourself, the inner process of honesty, and open to others about what I'm honest towards. So you have to constantly show your beliefs and reevaluate your beliefs to be always honest. And this is an impossible task, but it's a striving, it's a process that we can navigate what we're honest towards.
On honesty, I read something last week that last weekend that might interest you. It's someone who said that honesty is now more important than truth. And the view is, in the world of post-truth, where truth is not only subjective and perceived, but also manipulated and difficult to apprehend on which you operate in. In this world of post-truth, deepfake, fake news, etc., the thing society should value most is honesty, because truth has lost its meaning. And the only way to operate is to try to be honest as much as possible about things.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important point, that distinction between honesty and truth. Honesty is an orientation of your being in the world, right? Whereas truth is something else apart from that. But yeah, no, I think that's a really important distinction. Nice one.
Yeah, and we also we took up data in Star Trek, that is trying to be complete honest and open towards what it says and thinks. At the same time, we talked about AI. AI is internally very honest towards its own programming, but even there can be bugs, like human biases. So inside a program, there can be bugs that the computer don't know that it's honest towards. But also to us, most AI and machine learning are black boxes. So we don't know what they're honest towards or what the algorithms are really doing. And as they becomes recursive in itself, right, and be able to write themselves, it becomes an impossible task itself to know what they're honest towards. So.
That goes way beyond leadership. I mean, we have an enormous problem with AI, where things become so complex that we can't actually unthread what's going on. And as you see, the whole notion of truth, as Wasim said, it's nebulous. It's something we aim for, but it's never something we can say for sure we've got it. In fact, we've stopped being open if we say we absolutely got it.
Sorry, just before, something's just occurred to me. I'm sorry to jump in, but something's just occurred to me. Maybe the state of honesty is the not holding truth too hard, not holding any truth too tightly, something like that. Does that land? I didn't say it quite right, but it's something like that.
Yeah. So not being too righteous.
Yeah, something. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Accountability is different in different culture, or better, how you try to hold people accountable is different in different culture. And so we were trying to understand where was the root of how this then was getting embedded in the system. So if it is in the family level, it is in the way you design the governance system and so on. And that being accountable can be around any different action that you take about something that was supposed to be acted differently. So it's more procedural accountability, or instead there is a more content and result accountability. These were some distinction and question.
Yeah, and we were relating it to integrity. So it seems like they are interrelated in a certain way. In a way, to demonstrate integrity is also to do accountability of sorts, or rather, to do accountability is to maintain the integrity. It's just like a part of it.
Mm.
I'm just wondering how many of these principles are part of someone's innate personality, and how much of them are not. They can be something that's learned. So I mean, I think being objective is something you can learn skills. You can learn skills about becoming more objective. There are skills that you can train yourself. You can learn to be more objective. You can develop yourself as an individual.
What do we actually mean by that? Becoming more objective. What does that actually mean? Is this an overcut? Is this an understanding, recognition of one's biases, or is it an attempt to see the world in, as it is, sort of thing? What do we actually mean by this word? So that's multiple subjectivities rather than an attempt at objectivity. That's
well,
multiplying your range of subjectivity.
I don't even think objectivity exists.
Well, that's why I asked. That's why I asked what we mean by the word. This is exactly what I asked. What we mean by the word.
I think objectivity might be with numbers and with data, but not with human beings. It's like, I think all these 7 Nolan principles can be encompassed into responsibility and being responsible. And I was talking to Jen about, discuss this. There's if you have all your basic needs covered, like your roof and your shelter and your food and your income and your whatever, then you do have a certain responsibility to become an adult and do something, get yourself informed and be open about it and have some integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership, and selflessness. And I think that's up to everybody. Most people shirk that, and I think there's a lack of adulthood. What one would think of being an adult is, and an adult should be, like really solid.
What comes to my mind is that most of these qualities are rare in the politician, at least in Italy. And it seems that if you want a politician to have all of those, you will not find him, but you have to put in place systems to check against those and to control and so on. And so it's not a system that promotes the escalation to that levels of people that naturally embodied those principles. So that you don't have then to develop system to try to take out the things. I don't remember in which pair we discussed this, but one way is to enforce those characteristics. Another way is to promote system that naturally would promote that kind of people that already have or developed that characteristics to get in power.
I think oversight is incredibly important, because I think a lot of people go into politics with the best of intentions. Those are not the ones who rise to the top, because the ones who rise to the top have to make compromises and have to you know, sort of smooth and smear and do stuff. And those are the ones that rise to the top. And it would be so refreshing to have somebody at the top say, hey, I don't know the answers, but I'm going to find out. And I have this group of experts and I have that group of experts, and I'm going to look into it. But I think what Cristiano said is oversight is incredibly important to hold you to these principles, to say, hey, buddy, you know, you haven't been totally, you don't have integrity, or you've been lying, and there's accountability and there's responsibility. And I mean, if you look at history, there's even if you look at politics right now, everybody just blow it out of their ass. And it's like, it's amazing what is being said. There's not even a semblance of social graces anymore.
It's a chicken and egg issue, right? Because the media also wants to report on what interests people. And I think there has been statistics or studies that were made that the things that get the most clicks are the things that are a bit of drama. People don't want to know about a piece of legislation that somebody in Congress is making, but they want to know how AOC and Nancy Pelosi exchanged some way of looking, and how can it be interpreted. It's not just the media's fault.
Our demand for these characteristics has a shadow side to it. Our expectation that people say be accountable is problematic, because if people are going to be thrown out when they don't meet the mark, then they're going to want to hide the fact that they aren't meeting the mark. So there is something of a paradox here. There's also something about our own humility, and our own acknowledgement. Well, you know, all of us have probably not lived up to the standard that we ought to have, you know, in our own lives. All of us have been dishonest. All of us are sometimes closed when we should be open. I don't know. I mean, I think one of the functions that politicians serve is that they're scapegoats that we can project our own shadows onto. I think that's one of the reasons why we like to keep them there and whine about them constantly, because they serve that function for us.
Our partners and our friends, based on certain principles, and we expect the best of them, it's just an extension. And I know that most people want the what do you call that, the TV that's real life, how do you call that, the
reality TV?
Yeah, that one.
Reality
TV shit. But I'm not interested. I do want the people around me to have a certain amount of honesty and integrity and openness. And if they don't, if it's really bad, I will leave them. If it's solvable, it's something you can discuss. And the same thing you would hope for somebody who gives you advice on laws and whatever public policy, and you would want to have somebody.
When there's people we know, there's a lot of sort of pressure to conform in a known group. As soon as somebody is distant, some leader that can't talk to you, can't talk to them, there's a sort of break of that. It's much more difficult to hold them to account. And I wonder if the fact that some of these countries get huge, so huge, and the leader is so distant, and he's just one, usually a man, usually just one person sitting at that huge pile of government. I wonder if just the scale makes the whole thing so much more difficult to.
I think from what I've seen in my life personally, and I've lived in different continents and gone through different political situations, the manipulation is so easy. I mean, if you have bad intentions, it is so easy to go to the top and just tell a story. I've seen wars start that way, and I've gone through war in war-torn countries, and it's so easy. One moment they're protesting the leader because he's an alcoholic, and the next moment they're going to war. And it's like, what? And people I know and thought, were educated, went right through and went right with it. And I don't know what it is.
Yeah, and this thing about adulthood, absolutely. I agree 100% on that. The next question that arises is, how do we turn people from children into adults? Like, how do we support people? And this is the thing, like we don't just walk up to our children and say, be an adult, and shout at them. Like, we support them through it. And that might include some kind of boundaries, and so there's a harshness and a hardness sometimes, but there's also some love and some understanding. I think a lot of the people that manage to find their way to the top are like they're narcissists, and it's trained into them, or I should say it's untrained into them. Like, there's bits.
So that's quite. I think it does.
Yeah.
Supporting children and supporting parents to be parents is super, super important.
The question that was raised by Ben, I think it could be slightly altered. It's not that we don't have the answers of how to do that. There's plenty of stuff, plenty of material. I think the question is how to get that material into the practice, because many people, they literally have the books in their homes and they're not going to read them. So I think there are plenty of solutions.
That's me. That's me.
So I think
me.
that's not the.
I am this parent.
We have plenty of solutions. It's just like with throwing out the trash. You know how to sort it. You know where the things go. You just don't do it. So it's not so about the knowledge. It's more about the structures that support the implementation of the new habits.
The thing with those books, though, right, is that lots of them actually contradict each other.
What?
And
through the
a lot of the books, about how best to raise your children.
Yeah.
A lot of them contradict each other. Well,
I'm not talking about those.
And then everyone wants to chip in, and I mean that, but I mean that's my experience as a parent. But like, just in life in general, everyone's got a view about what's the best way to support somebody through change, or what's the best way to be a leader, or what are the best characteristics, or what are
The thing is, there are no general answers to any of these questions. This is where we get stuck, right? Because you can't write a book with a general answer to any of these questions. All of these things are situational, contextual, right? So there are no books that can give you these answers. It's just an absurd notion, really.
I disagree.
I can't agree with you, Eric. I think you do have to be context sensitive, but I think we're in a very fortunate time. We've got psychologists and human development. The study of human development, cognitive science, is absolutely fabulous. What they're doing now, they're really, really learning a lot. So I think in terms of child rearing as well, I think there's an awful lot of really good.
So do you believe there is a single best way to raise a child that applies in all situations?
No, I don't.
So this is what I mean. So of course you can't write a book about the best way to raise a child, right? Because it's
context.
And also the other thing that happens in these.
You
the other
can.
thing that happens in these different areas of study, these areas of is once you go in and you start looking, they're all disagreeing with each other. They're all finding different
I
information, and there's some. No, but it's like, I mean, it is though, isn't it? It's like in science, there's always, if you have a particular opinion about the way the world works, there's going to be somebody somewhere that's got the credentials that's going to say the thing that you want to believe, that you can pull up and use as a nice excuse to not be open to change if
But
you
that's
so
a different
choose.
problem. That's a totally different problem. Just because somebody wrote on the
Okay.
wall that that he's God doesn't mean that it is true. So if somebody is proclaiming something in some book and it's very popular or controversial or whatever, it still does not make it right. So I guess I get your point that it's difficult to navigate, and maybe that's why people don't implement, because one book says beat them, the other one don't beat them, and I get confused, so I don't do anything in particular, just whatever comes. That's why I say the problem is how to make people implement things that are more conducive to change. So
I
how to support.
I want to ask a question. Like if we forget about books and what book A and book B tell you to do, and think more generally about morality, what ethics and notions of morality can you teach a child if the parent is has a relativist notion of morality? That if many of us think that ethics and principles and are situational and contextual, and there is no notion of absolute truth, and there is this sort of relativism that is widely accepted among elites nowadays, how can you be a relativist and still teach a sort of morality, knowing that a child will not understand all the nuances and complex notions?
Well, there are different viewpoints. I understand what you're saying, but I just listened to a podcast by Robert Plomin. He's a research professor of behavioral genetics at the Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience in King's College, London. And he claims that genetics are a really huge component on how we turn out. Even more so, because I've always been like nurture versus nature, there must be a balance. And according to him, there is a way bigger balance in genetics than there is in nature. So apparently, somebody who that's always been the question, children who grow up in a situation in a family that is terrible and turn out wonderful, and then you have children who have everything, blah blah blah, and turn out really terrible. And I can see that even in the way that the difference between my brother and me, although we were brought up with different rules, there is a genetic component, because I'm the black sheep of the family. And we all know of our own history that some things impacted us from our childhood, and others, we just turned out, despite everything, we turned out the way we are. And there has to be a genetic component. So if there is a genetic component, we cannot even attempt to perhaps even, change a society. It's just a matter of hoping for the best. Yeah, but you're holding on to nature. You're holding on to nurture. You want to hold on to nurture because you're a parent, and you want to know that your influence is positive, or you did your best. But what if it isn't? What if it doesn't matter?
There's this other weird halfway place as well, which is epigenetics, which is where different. So the biology and in culture or sociology, there's this kind of weird crossover place too, where positions here. There's nature, there's nurture, there's a crossover epigenetic thing, and which is it?
Nature versus nurture things is a I think an absurd oversimplification of the framing of the context. You know what I mean? It's just way more than that. To think of any organism in isolation of its environment is absurd, right? You know, you cannot examine an organism. You can't take it into a lab and examine it and expect to understand it, right? It is its interactions with its environment. At its most fundamental level, an organism is its interactions with its environment.
And it's biology and its genes.
Yeah, and that's one side of the interaction, if you like, right? But the organism is not the chemicals and the genes and the structures and the cells and the blah blah blah. I mean, it is that, but that's not the organism. That's one. You know how they've got these maps, right? But you can go a whole different kinds of maps, right? You can have maps that highlight this feature or that feature or that feature or that feature, right? That's exactly what it is. Biology is one map. And you can highlight that feature, and it's right, it's true, but it's only one layer of the actual thing.